The stillness of the room was broken only by one sharp rhythm. Snip, snip, snip. The clean, metallic bite of scissors cutting through strands of hair echoed like a cruel metronome, slicing the air so coldly it seemed to chill the walls. Sunlight poured in from the wide window, golden and warm in any other moment. But here it illuminated something grim, a crime disguised as tenderness. Dust motes floated carelessly in the beam, turning and spinning, while below them a silent tragedy grew across the polished wooden floor. A river of dark, silken hair slid into a growing pile. Long locks, once glistening and nearly alive with beauty, now stripped away and discarded like worthless scraps. Each glossy strand that fell wasn't just hair. It was history. It was belonging. It was love, memory, pride. And in a cruel handful of minutes, those years were being severed, piece by piece, like pages ripped from a book no one would ever be allowed to finish reading. The one sitting in the chair, clutching her quiet dignity as strands tumbled around her, was Ara. For as long as anyone could remember, she was loved for her kind nature, her soft hospitality, and most unmistakably, her breathtaking hair. It was her crown, a waterfall of midnight silk that cascaded nearly to her waist. Strangers had stopped her on the street to admire it. Friends envied it. Neighbors whispered about how she must care for it so well. Ara's hair wasn't just admired, it was adored. Like a part of her soul you could see from the outside, and the one cutting it away was her own daughter-in-law, Chloe. Chloe's hand moved steadily. The blades sheared closer and closer to Ara's scalp, her grip unshaking. What burned was not physical violence, no shoving, no shouting. There was only stillness, punctured by that horrifying sound of steel on hair. Snip, snip. Each cut was merciless, deliberate, and Chloe's expression, half serene, half predatory, was even more terrifying than rage might have been. A thin smile curved on her lips, but it was a mask of cruelty. Her eyes glinted with a sharpness far colder than the scissors. This was not a moment of loss of control. No accident. This had been building inside her for years. On the floor, Ara's crown lay in silence. Around her shoulders, shame gathered like a shroud. Every snip stripped away a victory from the woman who had done nothing but love her family, nothing but offer warmth. Years of selfless motherhood, years of memories, reduced to a pile darkening the sunlit wood. Ara's quiet gasp never even left her mouth. Chloe thought they were alone. She believed that this quiet act of betrayal was hers and hers alone to savor. She thought she had no witness. She thought she could walk away afterward, framing it with excuses. It was an accident, a slip, a misunderstanding. She suggested it, a lie wrapped in hospitality. No one would know what ugly seed had finally sprouted inside her. But she was wrong. There in the doorway, hidden in the deeper shadows, stood Mark, her husband, Ara's son. He had not intended to be home. Work had ended early, and in his absent-mindedness, he had left his keys. He came in softly, careful not to disturb his mother and wife, and in doing so, he walked in on the moment that split his entire world in half. He stood frozen. He could not breathe. His chest clenched as he watched hair fall like fallen leaves, that dark silk that his father had once kissed, that he had brushed as a boy in comfort, stripped away mercilessly by the woman he once believed was kind. His wife, his partner. The one person he thought would protect his mother as fiercely as he did. Instead, she smiled with cruel calm as she destroyed her. He didn't move, didn't cry out, just stood hollow, heart cracking with every snip. Snip, snip, snip. And in that doorway the family unraveled in silence. 3 lives breaking without a word. The haunting question wasn't just, why was Chloe doing this? That answer was written in green jealousy and quiet resentment. The darker question was, why wasn't Mark stopping her? His silence was its own betrayal. His inaction would echo louder than any scream. To understand why these scissors carried so much weight, why they could bring a house of love crumbling down, you have to understand the family itself. On the surface it was perfect. Ara, the devoted widow. Mark, the loyal son, a good gentle man. Chloe, the sweet daughter-in-law, painted in smiles and kindness. To outsiders, they were harmony itself. At church picnics, at neighborhood gatherings, at family dinners, they were admired. Ara with her pies, Chloe helping at her side, Mark in the background proud and unworried. But perfection is a picture frame that hides cracks, and inside those cracks grew rot. The rot was Ara's hair. To Ara, it was memory. Her late husband had adored it. He used to run his hand through it and laugh, saying it was like a waterfall of midnight. To her, keeping her hair was keeping him. It was her connection to love she lost, her symbol of youth, her refusal to let memory wither. She nourished it not out of vanity, but longing. To her friends it was beauty. To Ara it was survival. But to Chloe, that same hair was poison. What began as a faint sting of envy grew sharper with each compliment. Every barbecue, every shopping trip, people turned to Ara. "Your hair is magnificent. It must be so much work, but it's perfect. Oh, Ara, you must share your secret." Always Ara's name. Always Ara's glow. Chloe smiled tightly, always chiming in agreement, but inside she burned. She was the younger woman, the one who should draw the gaze, the admiration. Instead, she felt like a background actor watching the star steal the spotlight. Next to Ara, Chloe felt small, invisible. She began to see Ara's hair not simply as hair, but as an enemy, a rival, a thief of the attention she believed she deserved. Jealousy doesn't strike like lightning. It seeps. Each time Mark brushed a strand from his mother's shoulder with soft affection. "You look beautiful, Mom." Chloe's heart hardened a little more. Her comments began softly, disguised as jokes. "Mom, aren't you worried that's too much maintenance for your age? Or ever think of trying something shorter, trendier?" Ara laughed them off, blind to the venom. Mark didn't notice at all. He thought Chloe loved his mother deeply. He thought her smiles were genuine. But blindness often hides storms, and in Chloe a storm churned in silence. Her jealousy bloomed until it was no longer passive. She began to fantasize, cruel little daydreams she pushed down at first. But each night, in shadows, she pictured it. The scissors sliding, the beautiful locks piling on the floor. She imagined the power. She imagined taking everything Ara held sacred and snipping it away until there was nothing left. At first, it scared her. "I'm a good person," she whispered to herself. But the images always returned. They became her comfort, her guilty indulgence. When she felt invisible, she imagined herself victorious. When she felt small, she imagined herself holding the scissors, finally powerful. And eventually the dream twisted into belief. If the hair was gone, the rival would be gone. Mark's gaze would retreat from his mother and land where Chloe thought it belonged, on her. So she began to plan. Carefully. Secretly. Not an outburst. Not clumsy violence, but a calculated strike dressed as care. So no one would ever suspect malice. She would wait for the right day, the right moment, and when it came, she would leave no witnesses. But she was wrong. The perfect family photo was about to tear itself apart in that quiet little sunlit room. And so we return to the question that matters most, one that still chills even now. Why, that sunny afternoon, with scissors gleaming, did Chloe finally decide this was the day to act? What was the final trigger that made her pick up those scissors? And most importantly, what was the terrible truth that Mark's silence was hiding? The story of Ara's beautiful hair is not over. In fact, the most shocking part has only just begun. The quiet snip of the scissors was just the first sound in a story that would end in heartbreak, betrayal, and a shocking revelation that would tear a family apart forever. Before Chloe, life was quiet, but full. Her home, a small cozy house with a beautiful garden, was her sanctuary. She had lived there for over 40 years. First with her husband George, and then after he passed away with the memories they had made together. George had been a kind, strong man with a gentle laugh. He was the one who had always celebrated her hair. On their wedding day, he told her she looked like a queen, not because of her white dress, but because of the dark crown of hair that framed her face. He would often sit behind her in the evenings, gently brushing it, his hands careful and loving. For Ara, every strand was tangled up with a memory of him. After he was gone, caring for her hair became a ritual, a quiet way to keep a piece of him with her. It was a living connection to the greatest love of her life. Ara was a simple woman. She found joy in small things. The first rose of summer blooming in her garden, the smell of bread baking in her oven, a phone call from her son, Mark. She was known in the neighborhood for her kindness. If a neighbor was sick, Laura would be the first at their door with a pot of hot soup. If a child fell and scraped their knee, she was there with a bandage and a warm cookie. She was the heart of their small community, a woman who seemed to have an endless supply of warmth and goodness. But underneath her cheerful spirit, there was a quiet loneliness. Her son was the center of her universe, and she worried about him. She wanted him to be happy, to find a good woman who would love him and take care of him. Her biggest dream was to see him build a family of his own, to fill her quiet house with the sound of grandchildren's laughter. Mark was a good son, just as his mother had raised him to be. He was a hard worker at the local construction company, known for being reliable and honest. He called his mother every day and had dinner with her at least 3 times a week. He loved her fiercely and felt a deep need to protect her, especially after his father died. He saw her as a perfect, gentle soul who needed to be shielded from the harshness of the world. When he met Chloe, he felt like he had won the lottery. They met at a friend's barbecue. Chloe was vibrant and full of life, with a laugh that could fill a room. She listened to him with wide, interested eyes, making him feel like he was the most fascinating man in the world. He fell for her fast and hard. When he brought Chloe home to meet Ara, he was nervous. His mother's approval meant everything to him, but he had nothing to worry about. Chloe was perfect. She walked in with a bouquet of Ara's favorite flowers and a bright, genuine-seeming smile. She called her Mrs. Miller at first, but by the end of the night, Ara insisted, "Please, dear, call me Mom." Chloe hugged her, and Mark's heart swelled with happiness. He saw his two favorite women getting along beautifully. He saw his future, a perfect blend of the old and the new. He imagined holidays together, family dinners, a life filled with love and peace. He saw a dream coming true, and he was so focused on this beautiful picture that he failed to notice thesmall, almost invisible details that didn't quite fit. Chloe's life had been very different from Mark's. She grew up as the middle child in a loud, busy family where she always felt overlooked. Her older sister was the smart one. Her younger brother was the athletic one. And Chloe was just Chloe. She was not the prettiest, not the cleverest, not the funniest. She spent her childhood fighting for a little bit of attention, a small piece of the spotlight. She learned early on how to be what other people wanted her to be. She became a chameleon, changing her colors to please her parents, her teachers, her friends. She learned that a sweet smile and agreeable words could get you much further than being your true self. Deep down, a bitter seed of resentment took root. She grew up craving admiration, desperate to be the one person in the room that everyone noticed. The first time she met Ara, she was genuinely charmed. Ara was warm and welcoming, everything she could have hoped for in a mother-in-law. But then it happened. As they sat in the living room, a neighbor popped in to return a borrowed baking dish. The neighbor's eyes went straight to Ara. "Oh, Ara," she gushed. "Your hair is just glowing today. It's more beautiful than ever." Ara blushed and thanked her. Chloe sat there holding her perfect smile in place, but inside she felt a familiar sting. She was the new girlfriend, the special guest, but in that moment she was invisible. It was the first time she felt the shadow of Ara's hair fall over her. It was a small thing, a tiny moment, but it was the beginning of a dark and obsessive jealousy. After she and Mark got married, Chloe moved into the house next door to Ara. It was Mark's idea. He wanted to be close to his mom to help her out as she got older. Chloe agreed, smiling, saying it was a wonderful idea. And so began her daily life in the shadow. Every compliment Ara received about her hair felt like a personal insult to Chloe. At family gatherings, an aunt would say, "Chloe, you look lovely." But Ara, my goodness, you never age. It must be that hair. Chloe would laugh along with everyone else, but her heart would grow a little harder. She began to study the hair to watch how Mark looked at it. Sometimes when his mother was talking, he would unconsciously reach out and touch a strand, his eyes full of love and admiration, the same look he used to give Chloe. She started to believe the hair held some kind of magic, some power over people that she could never have. She tried to compete. She spent a small fortune on her own hair, getting expensive cuts and colors. She would come home with a new style, excited to show Mark, and he would say, "That looks nice, honey." But then they would go to ours for dinner, and ours' simple long dark hair would seem to outshine her efforts without even trying. The jealousy started to twist into something uglier. It became a quiet, seething hatred. She began to fantasize about it being gone. The thoughts would come to her at night as she lay in bed next to a sleeping Mark. She'd imagine a fire, a terrible accident, anything that would destroy the hair. These thoughts were her dark secret, a poison she nurtured in the hidden corners of her mind. On the surface, her relationship with Aurora blossomed. She became the daughter Alara never had. They would garden together, their hands in the dirt, talking for hours. Chloe learned all of Ara's recipes, mastering her famous apple pie. She was so good at her act that Ara trusted her completely. Ara would tell her friends, "I am the luckiest mother in the world. Chloe is a gift from heaven." Ara, in her trusting nature, couldn't see the truth. She couldn't see the flicker of something cold in Chloe's eyes when she turned her back. She didn't notice that Chloe would sometimes accidentally spill water near her special hair products or misplace her favorite pearl-handled brush. These were small acts of war that went completely unnoticed by Aurora and Mark. Mark was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in his own home. He saw his wife and his mother laughing together in the kitchen and thought, "This is perfect. This is everything I ever wanted." He was a man who avoided conflict. He didn't like to look too deeply into things, preferring to believe that if everything looked fine on the surface, then it must be fine underneath. He mistook Chloe's silence on certain topics for contentment. He mistook her perfect imitation of a loving daughter-in-law for the real thing. His love for both of them acted like a blindfold, preventing him from seeing the dangerous obsession that was growing stronger in his wife's heart with each passing day. He was the guardian of this little family, but he had no idea that the biggest threat was not outside the walls of their homes, but living right beside him. The situation was like a pot of water on a stove. The heat was being turned up so slowly that no one noticed it was about to boil over. The compliments for Arashare kept coming, each one adding more heat. The feeling of being second best, of being invisible, kept fueling Chloe's rage. She started to believe that the hair was the only thing standing between her and true happiness. It was a ridiculous, irrational thought. But her jealousy had grown so large that it blocked out all reason. She truly believed that if she could just get rid of the hair, Mark would look at her with the same adoration he showed his mother. She would finally be the queen of his heart, the undisputed center of his world. One afternoon, a few weeks before the incident, Chloe was helping Ara clean out an old closet. In the back, tucked away in a dusty sewing box, she found them, a pair of heavy silver fabric scissors. They were old, but perfectly sharp. Alara mentioned they had belonged to her grandmother. "They can cut through anything," she said with a fond smile. Chloe picked them up. The weight of them in her hand felt significant, powerful. She opened and closed the blades, listening to the clean, sharp snick they made. As Ara's back was turned, Chloe held the scissors and looked at the long, dark braid hanging down's back. A dark thought, clearer and more powerful than ever before, shot through her mind. It was no longer a vague fantasy. It was a plan. She put the scissors back in the box, but she didn't forget where they were. She knew with a chilling certainty that she would be holding them again very soon. The final piece of her terrible puzzle had just clicked into place. The day it happened began like any other beautiful Tuesday. The sun was warm. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in Ara's garden, and the world seemed peaceful. But inside Chloe's mind, a storm was raging. The final trigger, the little push that sent her tumbling over the edge, had happened the day before. The local newspaper had published a small article about community gardens, and they had included a lovely photograph of Ara standing proudly next to her prize-winning roses. The caption read, "Local resident Ara Miller, whose beautiful spirit is as timeless as her famously beautiful hair." It was that last part, those three little words, that had felt like a slap in the face to Chloe. Famously beautiful hair. Even in a story about her garden, the hair was the star. Chloe had read the article while sipping her morning coffee, and a hot, tight knot formed in her stomach. She had spent the entire day with a fake smile plastered on her face, accepting congratulations on behalf of her mother-in-law. "Isn't that a lovely picture of your mother?" People would say, "She's just so elegant." Chloe felt like a ghost, a pale shadow standing next to a shining light. The jealousy which had been simmering for years was now boiling. The dark fantasies she had entertained for so long no longer felt like fantasies. They felt like a solution. They felt like the only way she could ever be seen, the only way she could ever truly shine. That night she barely slept. She lay in bed next to Mark, who was snoring softly, completely unaware of the turmoil in his wife's heart. She stared at the ceiling, the newspaper caption playing over and over in her mind. Famously beautiful hair. It was a brand. It was Ara's identity. Chloe felt she had no identity of her own. She was just Mark's wife or Ara's daughter-in-law. She decided then in the quiet darkness of her bedroom that she was going to take that identity away. She didn't know exactly how, but she knew it had to be done. The next morning, she woke up with a strange and terrifying sense of calm. The decision had been made. The storm inside her was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet purpose. She went over to Ara's house around lunchtime, carrying a container of her homemade chicken salad, a normal and loving gesture. Ara was delighted to see her. They sat at the kitchen table chatting about the weather and the newspaper article. "Isn't it silly?" Ara said with a laugh, making such a fuss over an old woman's hair. Chloe just smiled and said, "Don't be silly, Mom. You look beautiful. Everyone thinks so." Every word was a lie, a carefully placed stepping stone on the path to what she was about to do. Her plan began to form in that moment, simple and terrible. After lunch, as they were clearing the dishes, Chloe put her plan into action. "You know, Mom," she said, her voice full of fake concern, "you look a little tired. Why don't you let me pamper you a little bit? You can sit in your comfy chair in the living room, and I'll give you a nice relaxing scalp massage. It'll help you unwind." Ara, who never turned down a moment of kindness, thought it was a wonderful idea. She trusted Chloe completely. Why wouldn't she? This sweet girl was her daughter, in every way that mattered. Ara went into the sunlit living room and settled into her favorite armchair. the one with the soft floral cushions, and closed her eyes, a happy smile on her face. Chloe's heart began to pound in her chest. A heavy drum beat against her ribs. This was it, the perfect moment. She told Ara she was just going to grab some nice-smelling oil from the bathroom, but she didn't go to the bathroom. Instead, she walked quietly to the old closet where she had seen the sewing box. Her hand was steady as she reached inside and pulled out the heavy silver fabric scissors. They felt cold and powerful in her hand, just as Cher remembered. The weight of them was like the weight of her decision. There was no turning back now. This was the moment that would change everything forever. She walked back into the living room, hiding the scissors behind her back. Ara was still sitting peacefully with her eyes closed, her long dark hair draped over the back of the chair like a silken cloak. She looked so trusting, so vulnerable. For a fleeting second, Atney voice of reason screamed in Chloe's mind. "Stop, what are you doing? This is wrong!" But the bigger, louder voice, the one that had been fed by years of jealousy and resentment, drowned it out. This wasn't wrong, it told her. This was justice. This was taking back the light that had been stolen from her. She stood behind the chair looking down at the magnificent hair. It was so healthy, so full of life. She hated it. She hated it more than she had ever hated anything in her entire life. She took a deep breath and brought the scissors out from behind her back. The sunlight from the window caught the silver blades and they flashed brightly. Ar didn't see it. Her eyes were still closed, lost in a peaceful, trusting daze. Chloe could hear the blood rushing in her ears. It was so loud it almost blocked out the sound of the birds singing outside the window. Her hands were shaking now, just a little. She was about to destroy something beautiful. She was about to break the heart of the one woman who had only ever shown her love. The scissors felt cold and heavy in her hand. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was about to cross a line from which she could never return. If this part is making you nervous, drop a comment with, "I'm so scared for her." Let's see who is feeling the tension at this point. Her hand began to rise slowly, deliberately. She positioned the blades around a thick lock of hair right at the base of Ara's neck. The hair was so soft, so silky. For a moment, she just held the scissors there, feeling the life in the strands. Then she closed her eyes and squeezed. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet room. Snip. It was a dull final sound like a branch snapping. A heavy lock of hair, a lifetime of growth and memories, fell silently onto the floor. Ara's eyes flew open. She jolted in her chair. "Chloe," she asked, her voice filled with confusion. "What was that? Did you drop something?" She tried to turn her head, but Chloe placed a firm hand on her shoulder, holding her in place. "Just relax, Mom," Chloe said, her voice strangely calm, almost robotic. "I'm just giving you a little trim, getting rid of the split ends." But Ara knew something was wrong. That sound wasn't the sound of a small trim. She felt a sudden coldness on her neck where the thick hair used to be. "Chloe, what are you doing?" she asked, a tremor of fear entering her voice. She could see a dark shape on the floor out of the corner of her eye. It was her hair, a lot of her hair. Panic began to set in. "Please stop," she begged, trying to get up, but Chloe was stronger, her grip on Ara's shoulder like iron. Snip, snip, snip. Clue started cutting faster now with a frantic, desperate energy. She was no longer aiming for neatness. She was just cutting, hacking, destroying. Long, beautiful strands of hair fell to the floor, piling up around the chair. It was a massacre. Ara started to cry, soft, pleading sobs. "Why, Chloe? Why are you doing this to me? What did Ito?" Her questions were met with silence. The only answer was the relentless, cruel sound of the scissors. Chloe's face was a blank mask. There were no tears, no anger, just an intense, focused look in her eyes. It was as if she was in a trance, disconnected from the terrible act her hands were performing. She was watching the hair fall, watching her rival being destroyed, and she felt a strange, empty sense of victory. Each snip was a blow against every time she had felt invisible, every time she had felt second best. She cut and cut, moving up Ara's head, leaving behind a jagged, uneven mess. She was erasing Ara. She was erasing the past. The room was filled with the sound of Ara's quiet weeping and the steady, brutal snip of the scissors. The beautiful, sunlit room had become a place of horror. The river of dark hair on the floor grew wider and deeper. It was a shocking, heartbreaking sight. Chloe didn't stop until there was almost nothing left to cut. She was breathing heavily, her arm aching from the effort. She had chopped the hair all the way to the scalp in some places, leaving ugly, short patches. The crown of glory was gone, replaced by a ruin. Finally, she stopped. The last snipe chode in the sudden, terrible silence. The only sound now was Ara's choked, heartbroken sobs. Chloe opened her hand, and the heavy silver scissors fell from her grasp. They hit the wooden floor with a loud metallic clatter that seemed to break the spell. Chloe blinked as if waking from a dream, and looked down at what she had done. She saw the devastated woman sobbing in the chair. She saw the mountain of beautiful hair lying on the floor like a dead thing. She saw the silver scissors glinting in the sunlight next to the destruction they had caused. A wave of something, was it horror, regret, triumph, washed over her. She took a shaky step back, her mind a complete blank. What had she just done? What would happen now? R slowly lifted a trembling hand to her head, feeling the short, spiky stubble that was left. A fresh wave of grief washed over her, and she let out a cry of pure anguish that was so full of pain it could break your heart. It was at that exact moment that a small sound came from the doorway. It wasn't a shout or a gasp. It was a low, wounded noise, like the sound an animal makes when it's been hurt. Chloe's head whipped around towards the sound. Her blood ran cold. Standing in the shadows of the hallway, his face pale with disbelief and horror, was Mark. His keys were still in his hand. His eyes were not on her. They were fixed on the floor on the dark, silky river of his mother's ruined hair. And then his gaze slowly lifted first to his weeping mother, and then finally to his wife, who was still standing there, a monster in the middle of a sunlit room. The three of them were frozen in a perfect, terrible triangle of betrayal, heartbreak, and shock. The silence that followed was louder and more terrifying than any scream. The silence in the sunlit room was a living thing. It was heavy and sharp, filled with the three sounds that were left. The ragged, heartbroken sobs of Ara, the loud, frantic beat of Chloe's own heart, and the soft, shaky breaths of Mark, who was still standing frozen in the doorway, for a moment that stretched into an eternity. No one moved. They were like statues in a terrible play, each one trapped in their own private horror. Mark's eyes, wide with a pain that went beyond understanding, finally moved from the tragic pile of hair on the floor to meet Chloe's. In that look, Chloe saw everything shatter. She saw the love, the trust, and the beautiful future they had built together turn to dust and blow away in an instant. It was Mark who finally broke the spell. He didn't shout. He didn't run to his mother. He took one slow step into the room, then another. He walked past Chloe as if she wasn't even there. He knelt down on the floor beside his mother's chair in the middle of the dark river of her hair. He didn't touch Ara. He just stared at the hair on the floor. He reached out a trembling hand and picked up one of the long, silky locks. He held it in his palm, looking at it as if it were a precious jewel he had just found, broken and ruined. A single tear rolled down his cheek and fell onto his hand. Then, with a voice that was barely a whisper, a voice so full of grief it was almost unrecognizable, he said, "What did you do?" Chloe had no answer. The cold purpose that had guided her hands just moments before was gone, replaced by a terrifying, icy fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The perfect story she thought she could tell, that it was an accident, a moment of madness, died on her lips. Seeing Mark's broken face, she knew no excuse would ever be enough. The truth of what she had done in all its ugly, jealous glory was laid bare in the silence of that room. It was Ara, her voice from crying, who spoke next. "Mark," she whispered, "call the police." When the police arrived, they walked into a scene that made no sense. Officer Miller, a man who had been on the force for 20 years, thought he had seen everything. But this was new. He saw a beloved older woman, Ara Miller, sitting in a chair, her head shorn in jagged, ugly patches, her face wet with tears. He saw her son, Mark, kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a shocking amount of beautiful dark hair. And he saw the daughter-in-law Chloe standing stiffly by the window, her face pale and completely blank, the silver scissors lying on the floor not far from her feet. It wasn't a robbery, it wasn't a fight. It was something quiet, personal, and deeply cruel. "Can someone tell me what happened here?" Officer Miller asked, his voice gentle but firm. They were all taken to the station for questioning, placed in separate cold gray rooms. AR's statement was simple and heartbreaking. Through quiet sobs, she told the story. "Chloe is a good girl," she began, which confused the officer taking her statement. "She's like a daughter to me. She said she wanted to pamper me, give me a scalp massage. I closed my eyes. I trusted her." She explained the first sudden shocking snip of the scissors and how Chloe held her down. "I kept asking her why," Ara whispered, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "But she wouldn't say a word. She just kept cutting. I don't understand. I don't know what I did to make her so angry." She had no answers. To her, this act of violence had come out of a perfectly blue sky. Chloe's interview was very different. She was calm, too calm. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. Her story was practiced, but it had holes. "I don't really know what happened," she said, her voice a soft monotone. "Things have been very stressful lately. I haven't been feeling like myself." She painted a picture of a confused mind, of a woman who was not in control of her own actions, I picked up the scissors to give her a small trim. And then it was like my hand had a mind of its own. It was a fog. I remember the sound of the cutting. And I remember Mom crying. But it felt like I was watching a movie, not like I was really there. She was trying to plant a seed of doubt. She wasn't a monster. She was sick. She wasn't evil. She was unwell. It was a clever story, one that could possibly save her. But it was Mark's statement that created the real mystery. He was visibly shaken, his face pale, his hands trembling. He told the police he had come home from work early to grab his forgotten keys. As I was walking up to the door, I heard my mother cry out, he said. His eyes fixed on the floor, I ran inside and I saw what she had done. The hair was already on the floor. Chloe was just standing there and the scissors fell from her hand. The officers listened carefully. His story almost lined up. But there was a problem. A neighbor who had been watering his lawn had seen Mark's car pull up a full 5 minutes before he heard Alara's loudest cry of pain. What had Mark been doing for those 5 minutes? Why did he lie about when he entered the house? The police didn't push him on it. Not yet, but they made a note. The husband's story didn't add up. He was hiding something. The news of what happened spread through the small town like a wildfire. It was all anyone could talk about. At the grocery store, in the post office, at the local diner, people whispered, "Did you hear about Ara Miller? Her daughter-in-law chopped off all her hair." The story was so bizarre, so shocking that it became instant gossip. The local newspaper, the same one that had just praised Ara's beautiful hair, now ran a new headline. Family tragedy. Daughter-in-law arrested in bizarre assault. The photo of Ara from the Garden article was used. A smiling picture that now looked like a ghost from a happier time. The town was divided. Most people were horrified for Ara. She was a town treasure, a kind soul who didn't deserve such a cruel violation. They saw Chloe as a monster, a snake who had hidden in plain sight. They never trusted her smile. One neighbor told a reporter it never quite reached her eyes. But a few people felt a strange sort of pity for Chloe. She must have snapped, they whispered. No sane person would do something like that. The pressure of being the perfect daughter-in-law must have been too much. They saw a young woman who had a mental breakdown, a tragic figure, not a villain. The police investigation continued, but they were hitting a wall. They were looking for a motive, a reason that would make sense of this senseless act. They interviewed friends, family, and neighbors. Everyone told them the same thing. They had a perfect relationship. Chloe adored Ara. We never saw them argue, not once. The picture of a happy, loving family was so strong that it made Chloe's actions seem even more insane. There were no warning signs, no red flags. It was as if Adaman had possessed the sweet, smiling Chloe for 10 terrible minutes, and then vanished, leaving behind a shattered family and a pile of beautiful hair. Mark's lie hung in the air, a thick, dark cloud over the investigation. Why would he lie to protect her? Was he afraid of her? Did she have some kind of hold over him? Or was there a darker possibility? Could he have been involved somehow? Did he know about his wife's jealousy? Did he secretly want his mother taken down a peg? The police started to look at him more closely. His story of walking in at the very end felt too clean, too simple. His own inaction was suspicious. A normal man would have screamed, would have tackled his wife to stop her. Mark had just watched. The investigation shifted slightly. It was no longer just about what Chloe did. It was now also about what Mark didn't do. The police decided to dig deeper into Chloe's life. They got a warrant to search her computer and her phone. They were looking for anything. A diary, angry text messages, search histories that could explain her state of mind. For days, they found nothing. Her digital life was as perfect as her real-life act. Her social media was filled with happy pictures of her, Mark, and Ara. So lucky to have the best mother-in-law in the world. She had captioned a photo just a month before. It was a dead end. The case seemed destined to be a mystery, a bizarre story of a woman who just snapped for no reason. Then they got a phone call. It was from Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who lived across the street from Ara. She was hesitant to talk, saying she didn't want to cause trouble. "I'm sure it's nothing," she began, her voice quavering slightly. "But I've been thinking about it and it just feels strange." The officer on the other end of the line leaned forward, listening intently. "A few weeks ago," Mrs. Gable continued, "I was sitting on my porch, and I saw Chloe in Ara's garden. Ara wasn't home. Chloe was just standing there staring at Ara's prize-winning roses. Then she did the strangest thing. She reached out and took one of the most beautiful, perfect red roses, and she slowly, very deliberately, ripped all the petals off one by one until there was nothing left. Then she just dropped the stem on the ground and walked away as if nothing had happened." The officer was silent for a moment, letting the image sink in. It was a small thing, a meaningless act of destruction, but it was also the first crack in the perfect facade. It wasn't the act of a woman who was happy. It was the act of someone who hated beauty, someone who took pleasure in destroying something lovely. It was a quiet little preview of the horror that was to come. For the first time, the police had a glimpse of the real Chloe, the one who hid behind the sweet smile. And they knew with a sudden chilling certainty that this case was far from over. The small detail from the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, about Chloe ripping the petals off the rose was like a key turning in a rusty lock. It didn't blow the case wide open, but it allowed the police to see inside Chloe's mind in a way they hadn't before. This wasn't a sudden snap. This was a slow burn, a pressure that had been building for Avery long time. The investigators decided to bring Chloe in for another round of questioning. This time they wouldn't be as gentle. They were no longer buying the story of a woman lost in a mental fog. They believed she was a clever, manipulative woman who was now trying to escape the consequences of her cruel actions. They sat her down in the same cold gray room. But this time, they didn't start by asking her what happened. Instead, they placed a single perfect red rose on the table between them. Chloe looked at it, and for the first time since her arrest, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It was a tiny, almost invisible tightening of her jaw. She knew what they were doing. They were telling her without words that they had seen behind her mask. "Chloe," Officer Miller began, his voice calm and even. "We know you've been unhappy for a long time. We know you felt invisible. We just want to understand why." Chloe stuck to her story. She repeated her tale of stress, of not feeling like herself, of the strange fog that had taken over her mind. But this time her voice was less confident. The officer pushed her, asking about the compliments Alara received about how it felt to always be standing in her mother-in-law's shadow. "That's ridiculous," Chloe said, trying to laugh it off. "I loved Ara. I was proud of her." But her denial was weak. The officer then told her about Mrs. Gable and the rose. He described the scene in vivid detail. How she had stood in the garden. How she had systematically destroyed something beautiful. As he spoke, Chloe's calm exterior finally began to crumble. Her hands, which had been resting peacefully in her lap, clenched into tight fists. Her breathing became shallow. The wall she had built around herself was cracking. She had everything. Chloe suddenly whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Everyone loved her. Everyone looked at her, and that hair, it was like it had a life of its own. It was a constant reminder that I would never be good enough. It was the first honest thing she had said. It was a confession, not to the crime, but to the motive. The dam had broken. With tears now streaming down her face, Chloe told them everything. She poured out years of pent-up jealousy, frustration, and feelings of worthlessness. She described how every compliment for Ara's hair felt like a personal failure. She talked about the daydreams, the fantasies of cutting it, of destroying it. She admitted that the newspaper article was the final straw. "I just wanted it to be gone," she sobbed. "I thought if it was gone, he would finally see me." When she said he, she meant Mark. Her entire world, her entire sense of self-worth was wrapped up in her husband's attention. She had convinced herself that her mother-in-law's hair was her rival for his love. It was a twisted, irrational motive, but it was her truth. While Chloe was finally confessing the why, the police were still deeply troubled by the how. Specifically, they were troubled by Mark's role in the event. His lie about when he arrived at the house was a problem they couldn't ignore. They decided to bring him in again as well, but this time they had a new piece of information. The forensic team had analyzed the security camera footage from a small convenience store down the street. The camera had a clear view of Ara's front door. What they found made the hair on their arms stand up. The footage showed Mark's car pulling into his driveway at 1:15 p.m. He got out of his car and walked towards his own front door, but then he stopped. He seemed to have heard something. He turned and walked to his mother's house. He didn't run. He walked calmly. He opened the front door, which was slightly ajar, and stepped inside. That was at 1:17 p.m. Ara's first scream, the one the neighbor had heard, wasn't until 1:22 p.m. Mark had been inside that house for a full 5 minutes before his mother truly started to panic. He hadn't walked in at the end of the assault. He had been there for the entire thing. He had stood in that doorway and watched his wife terrorize and mutilate his own mother, and he had done nothing. The police played the video for Mark. They showed him the timestamp. They showed him his own calm entry into the house. They asked him to explain the 5 minutes of silence, the 5 minutes of him standing in the shadows while his wife held a pair of scissors. Mark watched the video and his face, which was already pale, turned the color of ash. He stared at the screen, at the image of his past self, and a deep, guttural sob escaped his lips. The Lee was exposed. There was nowhere left for him to hide. "I didn't know what to do," he stammered, his voice breaking. "I walked in and I saw her, standing behind my mom with the scissors. I heard the first snip. My brain just stopped working. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He explained that he was paralyzed by shock and fear. He saw the woman he loved turn into a monster, and he saw his gentle mother in terrible danger. And the two images were so conflicting that his mind simply shut down. "I just stood there," he whispered, hidden in the doorway, watching. "I was a coward." But the lead investigator, a woman named Detective Evans, felt there was more to the story. "Why didn't you shout for help? Why didn't you call the police immediately?" she pressed. Mark's eyes darted around the room, unable to meet hers. There was still something he was hiding. Evans had a hunch, a terrible gut feeling that went beyond mere cowardice. She decided to take a gamble. "Mark," she said, her voice soft but firm, "did you know Chloe was unhappy? Did you know she was jealous of your mother's hair?" Mark's head snapped up. His eyes were wide with a new kind of fear. This was it, the question he had been dreading. He shook his head a little too quickly. "No," he said. "No, I had no idea. They loved each other. It was another lie, and Detective Evans knew it." "Mark," she said, leaning forward, "we can find out the truth. We can look at text messages, emails. We can talk to your friends. It's better if you just tell us now. How long did you know?" A long, heavy silence filled the room. Mark stared at his hands, his whole body trembling. Then, in a voice so quiet they could barely hear him, he finally told the truth. The full, ugly, devastating truth. He had known. He had known for over a year. It started with small comments from Chloe. "Don't you think your mom gets a little too much attention for her hair?" she would ask. At first, he dismissed it as a joke, but the comments became more frequent, more bitter. "I wish people would see me sometimes," she told him one night. "I feel like I'm invisible when I stand next to her." He had seen the signs. He had seen the way his wife's smile would tighten when someone complimented his mother. He had noticed her little jabs, her passive-aggressive remarks. He knew she was deeply, unhealthily jealous, but he had done nothing. He was a man who hated conflict. He thought if he ignored it, it would just go away. He loved his wife, and he loved his mother, and he was terrified of the idea of them being at war. So, he pretended not to see it. He told himself it was just a small thing, that Chloe was just being a little insecure. He chose to live in a comfortable blindness rather than face the uncomfortable truth. The final, most damning revelation came out in a flood of guilty tears. About a week before the incident, Chloe had come to him, her eyes red from crying. She had told him she couldn't take it anymore. She confessed her dark fantasies about cutting the hair. "Sometimes I just want to take a pair of scissors and cut it all off," she had said, half joking, half serious. And what had Mark done? He had laughed. He had pulled her into a hug and said, "Don't be silly, honey. You're just having a bad day. You wouldn't really do that." He hadn't taken her seriously. He hadn't offered to get her help. He had treated her deep psychological pain like a childish tantrum. He had seen the warning signs clear as day, and he had chosen to ignore them. In that moment, everything became clear. Mark hadn't been paralyzed by shock when he walked into that room. He was paralyzed by guilt. He knew this was his fault. His inaction, his willful blindness, had allowed his wife's dark obsession to grow and fester until it exploded into this act of violence. He had stood in that doorway not just as a witness to a crime, but as a secret accomplice. His silence in the weeks leading up to the attack was just as damaging as his silence during the attack itself. This was the shocking twist. The story was not about one villain and one victim. It was a tragedy with three actors, each one playing a part in the destruction. Clue held the scissors, but Mark, through his cowardice and denial, had helped to sharpen the blades. The case was finally solved, but the truth was far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. The trial was a quiet, somber affair. The small-town courtroom was packed every day with curious neighbors, reporters from local papers, and the broken pieces of a family. R sat in the front row, a different woman from the one everyone had known. She wore a simple, elegant scarf wrapped around her head to cover the painful, patchy reminders of what had been done to her. She looked smaller, more fragile, as if the weight of the betrayal had stooped her shoulders. She rarely looked at Chloe, who sat at the defendant's table, her face pale and her eyes usually fixed on her own hands. But Ara's gaze often drifted to her son Mark, who sat in the other side of the aisle. Her expression when she looked at him was a complicated storm of love, pity, and a deep, bottomless disappointment. Chloe's defense team tried to argue for diminished capacity. They brought in psychologists who testified that Chloe was suffering from a severe inferiority complex and obsessive-compulsive-like thoughts, which had been exacerbated by her deep desire for her husband's approval. They painted a picture of a mentally fragile woman who had finally snapped under perceived pressure, not a cold and calculating monster. They argued that the act was a cry for help, a tragic result of untreated mental health issues. They tried to make Thedgery see Chloe not as a villain, but as another victim in this sad story. The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture. They used Chloe's own confession against her. highlighting the years of simmering jealousy, the fantasies of destruction, and the deliberate planning on the day of the attack. They brought Mrs. Gable to the stand, and her story about Chloe methodically ripping the petals from Theros was a powerful piece of evidence. It showed a pattern of quiet, deliberate cruelty. The prosecutor argued that this was not a sudden snap. It was a calculated act of violence, an assault intended to humiliate and emotionally destroy an elderly woman. The silver scissors were presented as evidence, and they lay on the table like a cold, silent witness to the crime. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Mark was called to the stand. He walked to the witness box like a man walking to his own execution. He couldn't look at his wife, and he couldn't look at his mother. He spoke in a low, shaky voice, and the entire courtroom leaned in to hear his testimony. Under oath, he was forced to admit the truth he had tried so hard to hide. He told the court about Chloe's confessions of jealousy, about her dark jokes, about his own decision to ignore all the warning signs. He recounted how he had laughed off her confession that she fantasized about cutting the hair. When the prosecutor asked him why he had stood in the doorway for 5 minutes and done nothing, Mark finally broke down. "I was ashamed," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "The moment I saw what was happening, I knew it was my fault. I knew I had let it happen. I stood there and all I could think was, I did this. I let this happen." His confession of guilt hung in the air. A shocking admission that changed the entire narrative. He wasn't just a bystander. He was an enabler. His cowardice had paved the road for Chloe's cruelty. You could feel the sympathy in the room shift. People were no longer just angry at Chloe. They were deeply disappointed in Mark. In the end, the jury found Chloe guilty of assault and battery. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, delivered the sentence. She acknowledged Chloe's psychological issues, but stated that they did not excuse her actions. "This was an act of profound cruelty," the judge said, looking directly at Chloe. "You took a woman who had shown you nothing but love, and you violated her in a deeply personal and humiliating way." Chloe was sentenced to 2 years in prison with another 5 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling upon her release. As the sentence was read, Chloe showed no emotion. She just nodded slowly as if she had expected it all along. The verdict was the legal end of the story, but it wasn't the real end. The true resolution happened outside the courtroom in the quiet, painful moments that followed. Mark tried to speak to his mother after the trial. He approached her in the hallway, his face a mess of tears and regret. "Mom," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry." Ara looked at her son, her only child. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached up and gently touched his cheek. "I know you are, Mark," she said, her voice soft but tired. "But sorry, can't put my hair back on, and it can't fix the trust that's been broken." It wasn't an angry statement, but it was a devastatingly honest one. She loved her son, but something between them had been irrevocably damaged. He hadn't just watched his wife hurt her. He had failed to protect her, the one thing he had always promised to do. The final unexpected twist in this story did not happen in a courtroom or a police station. It happened a few months later in front of a bathroom mirror. Ara had been struggling. The loss of her hair was more than just a physical change. It was a loss of identity, a constant visible reminder of the betrayal. She had avoided mirrors, hated the sight of her own reflection. The scarves she wore felt like a costume, a way of hiding her shame. Her friends would tell her she was still beautiful, but she didn't feel it. She felt broken. One evening, she was getting ready for bed. She took off her scarf and stood in front of the mirror, forcing herself to look. She saw the short, patchy gray and dark hair that was slowly starting to grow back. It was uneven and thin, nothing like the glorious mane she once had. Tears welled up in her eyes. She felt the old wave of grief and humiliation wash over her. But then something strange happened. As she looked at herself, really looked at herself, she saw something else in her reflection. She saw the face of a woman who had survived something terrible. She saw the strength in her own eyes, a resilience she never knew she had. She realized in that moment that her hair had never been the source of her beauty or her strength. It had been a symbol, yes, a connection to her past and to her beloved husband. But it wasn't her. She was a Lara Miller. She was a kind neighbor, a loving mother, a woman who could grow prize-winning roses. She was a survivor. The hair had been a crown, but it had also been a shield, something she hid behind. Now with it gone, she was just herself, exposed and vulnerable, but also somehow more real. A small, slow smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine smile she had felt in months. She reached up and touched her short hair. It felt soft, like a newborn chick's feathers. It wasn't the hair of her youth, but it was her hair, the hair of her present. And she decided in that quiet moment in front of the mirror that she was done hiding. She was done being a victim. The next day, for the first time since the attack, R. Miller walked out of her house without a scarf on her head. Her new hair, a testament to her survival, was open for the world to see. It was a silent, powerful statement. Chloe had tried to take her identity, but in the end, she had only helped Ara find a new, stronger one. Dear viewers, this story forces us to ask some difficult questions. Was justice really served? Chloe went to prison, but what about Mark? What is the right punishment for the sin of doing nothing? And it makes us wonder about the people in our own lives. Do we really see them? Do we notice the quiet signs of pain or jealousy before they explode into something terrible? Perhaps the most important lesson from Ara's story is about where we find our own strength. Is it in the things we have, the way we look, or is it something deeper inside, something that no one can ever take away? What do you think? Was Mark as guilty as Chloe? Comment below. I'm rating every single one of your thoughts. And if you found this story as compelling as I did, hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you question everything you think you know. If you want more stories about family secrets, check out the video on the case of the hidden inheritance next. You won't believe what a family is capable of when money is on the line. Always remember, at Virtuous Stories we love